All right, guys, Murph's here. And today we're going to do a little rifle comparison discussion. We're going to compare two top tier AR-15 models and discuss what it is that you're getting for your money. Now, when it comes to AR-15s and stuff like that, you have a couple of different crowds in the firearms community. And we've discussed this somewhat before in previous AR-15 videos. You have your just as good crowd, which are the guys that build their own AR-15s out of like Coke bottles and airsoft parts, and will tell you that their build is so much cheaper but just as good as a lot of top tier products, as well as people who buy budget rifles and now they'll sit there and tell you that their MP15 Sport 2 is way better than any LaRue or whatever premium brand you want to go after here. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you have to spend a ton of money on your AR-15 in order for it to be good. I am going to tell you that there is space in the firearms community for all price points. Somebody who perhaps just takes their AR-15 out to plink and stuff like that may not necessarily feel the benefits of a more expensive rifle. It's not necessarily a defensive option, or their budget doesn't allow them to get some top tier rifles. Now, then you also have your buy once, cry once crowd who have the luxury of being able to save a little bit more money, have the luxury to be able to wait in order to be able to get an AR-15 for their purposes, who then save up, scrimp all their lunch money together and stuff like that, and eventually wind up buying a more premium AR-15. I don't consider either one of these people to be wrong. The only thing that I consider to be wrong is when somebody starts to talk about when they start to step outside of their goals. So in my opinion, premium AR-15s are meant for people who are putting serious use on their AR-15s. Now, that is not to say that cheaper guns won't run the same, but you might have less quality control. You might have parts that are going to break more prematurely and stuff like that as people work around those rifles. That's one of the great things about the adaptability of the AR-15, though, is if you do buy a cheap gun, you can turn it into a Gucci gun over time. You can invest parts and all that kind of stuff as things wear out or as you progress as a shooter in order to better adapt it to your purposes. However, if you are considering getting into the deep end of the pool, perhaps you have had a few cheaper AR-15s and now you want to invest in something that you have a little bit more pride of ownership involved with. Or perhaps you're that buy once, cry once crowd that wants to really understand what it is that they're getting for their money and whether or not they should continue to scrimp together cash for a little bit longer, depending on what it is that they're trying to go after. So we're going to discuss two premium options today that are at a little bit different price points within the premium category so that you can better discern what it is that you want out of a rifle for the money that you're going to pay for it. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and introduce our players, starting off with this Daniel Defense DD M4A1 RIS 3, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. And we will also be talking about this LWRC M6 IC-A5. Both rifles chambered in 5.56. This rifle previously reviewed and update reviewed on the channel. Links in the description if you're interested in those videos. All right, so we're going to talk about the features of these rifles. We're also going to talk about accuracy and performance on the range. First thing I want to talk about, though, are price points so that we can keep this idea firmly locked into our minds for when we come to our conclusions at the end. In addition to price points, I want to go ahead and jump in and talk about conclusions. I'm going to give you no solid conclusions in this video. So if you're looking for me to unequivocally announce one of these to be the winner, you're going to be waiting an awfully long time because I have no intention of doing that. I plan on providing you enough information in order for you to be able to discern for yourself what it is that matters and which one of these rifles wins in your esteem. All right, now, the Daniel Defense comes in at about $2,300 MSRP. I did not pay that much for it, but these rifles were still bought by me. Let me go ahead and take this sling off. It's annoying me. This channel is not sponsored by anybody, and all things ammunition, guns, slings are provided by me. There, get that one point out of the way. This LWRC comes in at about $2,800 MSRP. So these are both over $2,000 rifles. This one just comes in a little bit closer to $3,000. We're going to talk about the features and components of these guns and discern whether or not they're actually performing at that price point or which one's performing better for its price point. So right off the bat, on both of these rifles, we have a variation of the A2 flash hider. One of the themes we can go ahead and set in place early with both of these rifles is that everything about these rifles are built in-house by the manufacturers. Newer M6 IC-A5s do come with Magpul grips, or a lot of newer LWRC products do come with Magpul grips, but this still has the original LWRC proprietary grip. Proprietary. It's of their own design, but this rifle will receive any standard AR-15 grip that you want to put on it if you're somebody who gets really broken up about AR-15 grips. We'll talk about that more here in a bit. Now, these flash hiders are not the same flash hiders that you go on like AR-15parts.com and purchase for like $8. These are, for whatever reason, built in-house by the individual manufacturers. Now, an interesting thing about the flash hider on this Daniel Defense is that it's actually slightly longer because this is a 14.5-inch pinned and welded barrel. So this flash hider is long enough to be able to bring this rifle out to the required 16 inches in order to not be an NFA item. This is a 16.1-inch barrel wearing a A2 flash hider. Most of the time, I would say, and this would be very accurate, that an A2 flash hider is more or less a glorified thread protector, because most people, if they have a specific purpose for the rifle, are going to take that A2 flash hider off so they can put muzzle brakes or suppressor attachments, all that kind of stuff. You can do that with this LWRC, but if you want to do that with this Daniel Defense, you're going to have to heat it up and you're going to have to get like into the tools and stuff like that, because the whole point of pinned and welding is that it's supposed to be a permanent attachment. As it sits now, based on the research that I've done, no silencer manufacturer really recommends trying to crank one of their silencers, like a gate lock type setup that would work with an A2 flash hider, onto this longer pinned and welded this pinned and welded flash hider. So take that for what you will. There are plenty of people on the internet who are willing to push those types of limits. I myself am not, and I would recommend you do the same. All right, now the barrels. Both of these are 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel barrels. However, they are slightly different. This is a cold hammer forged barrel made in-house by Daniel Defense. It is it's a government profile, and 1-in-7 twist, chrome lined, all that kind of stuff. Excellent barrel. This is a machine gun capable barrel, which is far beyond the requirements of the vast majority of shooters, like 99% of shooters out there on the market. This is the type of barrel that will outlast your sons. It'll be a hand-me-down to your grandkids. The receiver is probably going to give out before this barrel does. On the LWRC, we have a slightly heavier profile. Still, like I said before, 4150 chrome moly vanadium steel. It is chrome lined, 1-in-7 twist, and spiral fluted. Now, the whole idea of spiral fluting is supposed to be that you still get a denser cross-section than what you would find on a lighter weight barrel, but it's not as heavy as a full-on bull barrel. So you have a barrel profile similar to a bull barrel, but with these lightning cuts set into it, you also get increased surface area for cooling and a reduction in weight. It's like 20% or something like that is what the industry talking point is for this barrel. Now, there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not this barrel is really that advantageous, and I can understand some things. So yes, if I take the outer diameter, this barrel is thicker than what it would be if we had it pared all the way down. If we had the whole profile as deep as these spiral grooves, the barrel would be substantially lighter. However, it doesn't have all of the barrel harmonic characteristics, the relationship with barrel whip that we would necessarily find with a full-on bull barrel. I do still think that with this cross-section, it has more rigidity than a lightweight barrel, but it's maybe not the flex that the manufacturer makes it out to be. And I always take manufacturer talking points with a little bit of a grain of salt, because like, yeah, cool, that might be really great, but that doesn't mean that it's great in all instances. I still think this is a good barrel, and one of the things that I also really like about this barrel, which is probably the least important aspect of it, is that it really makes this rifle stand out. And when you're paying this amount of money for a rifle, getting back to that pride of ownership thing, you want something that looks individual about your rifle, and those spiral flutes really give it a lot of personality. All right, so in this case, I would say that the barrels are very much so equal. I would not put one of these barrels ahead of the other. I think they are absolutely fantastic barrels. Daniel Defense really likes to play at the fact that they use cold hammer forging machines in-house in order to be able to produce their barrels. That's great. I don't think this barrel is any less reliable. I don't think this barrel is any less durable. I do not think your average shooter is going to wear out either one of these barrels anytime soon. All right. Let's talk about the gas systems real quick. The Daniel Defense has a mid-length gas system, which I'm a huge fan of. I appreciate seeing mid-length gas systems in rifles anytime it is that I get the chance. A rifle having a mid-length gas system increases my interest in that rifle like tenfold. The carbine length gas system is not bad. In fact, it actually gives you greater reliability. It's more likely to be able to overpower debris and stuff like that that might get worked up into the bolt, or maybe try to overcome friction from like carbon buildup, though friction's friction and more force doesn't long-term save friction. Mid-length gas systems, however, recoil more mildly. Now, that's not to say that the 5.56 is a heavy recoiling rifle or heavy recoiling cartridge, as much as it is to say that if you're going for faster shot splits and all that kind of stuff, having less recoil causing like dot or reticle bounce and stuff like that is advantageous in that case to be able to really trim up those splits. So big fan of the mid-length gas system on this rifle. The LWRC, on the other hand, is an external piston driven gun. So we have a short stroke gas piston that taps off gases from the barrel, drives this rod back here, which then moves the bolt. I've done a whole video discussing the pros and cons between direct gas impingement and external gas piston. If you're just interested in that, go ahead and check the link in the description. Now, the realities of an external gas piston is that you have kind of like a wiggle that starts up here and moves all the way to the rear of the rifle, whereas with direct gas impingement, you just tap off gases, which then run to the bolt, and all the movement occurs much closer to the shooter's, like to the rifle's center of gravity and to the shooter's center of gravity. So generally, you're going to have a little bit more perceived recoil with an external gas piston system. Again, this is still a 5.56 gun, so it's not like recoil is really that much heavier as much as what we're talking about are splits. What we're talking about is what it's going to take in order to be able to reacquire a target should our recoil management be a little bit compromised. You're going to have to do more for recoil management with this rifle than you are with the Daniel Defense's mid-length gas system, theoretically. We'll see how that plays out in shooting here in just a little bit once we get to that portion of the comparison. All right, handguards. The LWRC has a kind of proprietary approach to the handguard. We can see here it's a little bit shorter than that on the Daniel Defense. We have two thumb screws in the front in order to be able to remove the top portion of this handguard to be able to service the gas system, which seldom ever needs to be done because that's the great thing about external gas pistons. They're so reliable, you don't have to put as much effort into cleaning them. All of your dirt stays up here and doesn't necessarily get back to the bolt. So I hardly ever have to do anything with the bolt on this particular rifle, as opposed to direct gas impingement guns, which are venting that gas directly into the gas key, which goes into the bolt carrier. Back to the handguards though. So this is actually a proprietary setup. This rifle came with two Picatinny sections, and we can see in the handguard here, we have screw holes. The purpose of these screw holes is to be able to attach these Picatinny sections like I have for my light right here, in order for you to be able to attach those and scale the rifle to the setup that you want. And these holes are all the way around the handguard on the 3, 6, and 9 positions. 12 o'clock position, of course, Picatinny rails. The great thing about this type of setup is that you can scale to what it is that you want. This is kind of indicative of an older style of doing handguards with the Picatinny rails. I can think of several rifles that had the methodology of just being able to screw direct thread your rails onto the handguard itself instead of using key mod or using Picatinny or even using M-lock. I don't consider this a bad thing. It's probably about the same number of points of failure as you could potentially run into on a M-lock or a key mod rail. But one thing that I would point out is that I'm attaching a Picatinny rail to then attach a light. Whereas when I go with key mod or M-lock, I can get M-lock specific mounts to be able to just thread into there without having to get a Picatinny section to be able to add a rail to. So there's something to think about there. I guess it is a little bit more points of failure, but it's not been an issue thus far with this rifle. I've never had. Got to check it as I say that, but I've never had this mount come loose, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. Now, in addition to that, this has an excellent Mounting point here to the barrel nut. This is definitely a proprietary barrel nut right there. This is going nowhere. This will not rotate. This will be excellent for being able to mount lasers, be it IR or the visual spectrum, doesn't really matter. They're not going to lose zero on this rail. One of the issues with this rail, though, is that this is a proprietary part because you're working with an external gas piston. You can't just swap in whatever rail that you want to, especially with this proprietary barrel nut and all that kind of stuff. You can't just slap whatever rail you want onto. You're losing some of the adaptability of the AR-15 because this is an external gas piston gun with these types of proprietary parts. And that is a disadvantage of external gas piston. We put this up against the Daniel Defense RIS 3. We have an excellent lightweight M-LOK rail with multiple positions to be able to mount accessories and all that kind of stuff. A 6-bolt locking system onto the barrel nut. This rail is also not going to cant. The original 4-lug locking system wasn't necessarily going to twist on you, but this definitely is not going to twist on you. You can mount whatever lasers you want to this rail with the expectation that they will not lose zero. It is a little bit longer rail, which allows me to get a little bit more spaced out on the rifle, but I don't consider the LWRC to be held back by its length of rail. Just to be clear, I do have to chicken wing a little bit more with the LWRC as opposed to this rifle, but again, I don't consider it to be too detrimental. We'll talk about it more once we get into shooting. Now, we do still have the adaptability of the AR-15 represented in this rifle. For some reason, this rail didn't do it for you. You could remove it and slap whatever rail it is that you want on here. I don't know why you would, but you could. If you're just, that much of an individualist that you want to make sure that your rifle's 100% yours, even though you bought it this way, you can go ahead and rip this off and put whatever rail you want. I would highly recommend keeping this rail. That's how highly I think of it. All right, let's talk about bolts real quick. All right, so the Daniel Defense has a pretty standard bolt. However, it is important to point out that these are high pressure tested, magnetical particle inspected. It is a true mil-spec bolt. So A2 profile or M16 profile and like Carpenter 158. It hits all of the wickets that you would want. You could possibly want out of a bolt, save one. The LWRC M6 IC-A5 also has all the wickets that you want, Carpenter 158. This is a very well-built bolt. However, you will note by its color, this is Nicor treated, which doesn't necessarily allow carbon to bond to it and all that kind of stuff, and reduces friction and also increases lubricity. Now, of course, also this being gas piston design, we can see that we have some pretty significant differences between these two bolts. This bolt has a gas key, this does not. Instead, this has a dished cut in the face there so that it can receive the gas piston rod and not induce carrier tilt. Carrier tilt being when the piston rod comes back and hits this key here, you could wind up with a slight canting of the carrier as it moves back against the buffer spring, which could cause some damage to your lower. That is also why we have a wider diameter on the back of this bolt in order to make sure that we once again stop carrier tilt from occurring. This is an incredibly well-designed bolt. Huge fan of this bolt, love the Nicor treating. Now, that is not to say that the Daniel Defense has a poorly designed bolt or it's crap because it is not treated with any type of lubricating material. However, it is internally chrome lined in order to be able to help keep it cleaner longer and all that kind of stuff. So it still has very positive features about it, but it's more run-of-the-mill. It's a more run-of-the-mill AR-15 bolt than what we find in the LWRC M6 IC-A5. Now, something else I want to point out is that the Daniel Defense did not come with iron sights. The LWRC did. It came with these excellent skirmish folding metal iron sights. They are locking. They are not spring-loaded, but they are locking. And kind of give me a little bit of like an HK vibe in the sight picture. These are like $200 sights. I understand manufacturers deciding to not add iron sights to the rifles because iron sights are a very individual thing and people have kind of specific requirements that they want to have sometimes out of iron sights, so they wind up like swapping them out anyway. Okay, I get that, but I appreciate that LWRC made sure that I could take this rifle out of the box and go straight to the range with it from the factory. I didn't have to stop anywhere along the way and buy anything but ammo. I didn't have to go get iron sights for it and stuff like that. And while iron sights aren't necessarily the most expensive thing in the world, depending on what it is that you go with, I still appreciate a rifle being ready to go out of the box. That's where I stand on that. You can take that any way that you want. My preference is to have sights already mounted on a rifle. Now, another thing, because this is not the only thing these rifles have in common, another thing these rifles have in common are a lot of ambidextrous parts, and that includes the charging handle. The charging handle on both of these rifles is oversized and ambidextrous. We have ambidextrous safeties, we have ambidextrous magazine releases, and we have ambidextrous bolt releases. Now guys, something that I've mentioned in the past, I am not the biggest fan of ambidextrous parts. I grew up training on, right-handed guns and all that kind of stuff, so I got very used to functioning different aspects of the rifle whenever I was shooting with my support hand, utilizing my support hand. So breaking my grip and covering my hand back to place the weapon back on safe and all that kind of stuff. Utilizing this portion here of my finger in order to be able to place the weapon on fire. That's stuff that I learned around. I don't necessarily default to utilizing ambidextrous safeties for those purposes. Same thing with bolt releases. I don't think an ambidextrous bolt release is at all helpful, because I still trained off of loading and coming up and hitting that ping pong paddle on the support side before I build my grip. This is a drastic movement of my trigger finger where I would much rather have down alongside this portion of the receiver. I did play around with it a little bit at the range during the process of this review and tried releasing with the ambidextrous mag release ambidextrous bolt release on this particular rifle, and I accidentally hit the magazine release. So there's that. I have found ambidextrous bolt catches to be most helpful whenever it is that I'm doing something administrative, like at the start of the video when I showed clear. Or if I'm at a competition or a course or something like that and I need to show clear, it's very convenient to be able to just lock that in with my pointer finger instead of having to like put it on my knee or my hip or something like that in order to be able to lock the bolt to the rear with the standard bolt catch. So that's not a big deal either way, in my own personal opinion. In addition to that, continuing the discussion on ambidextrous safeties, the standard defense has full-size ambidextrous safeties. They are both the same length on either side of the rifle, whereas this M6 IC-A5 has a short side safety on what is my offside. One thing that I found with short side safeties is that they have less mechanical advantage, so sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to actuate. This is very smooth, very easy to work around if I were to need to do so. So that's not that big of an issue. And what I like about shorter ambidextrous safeties is that they don't disturb my grip as much, which is to say that they do still somewhat disturb my grip. The full-size safeties on the standard defense most definitely disturb my grip, and that irritates me. I really don't like feeling it and would much rather have single-side safeties. The ambidextrous mag release, I don't consider that to even slightly be helpful. I can think of so few situations where I would actually need to use an ambidextrous mag release, and it all comes down to, for some reason, I am full-time fighting with my left hand. I just don't see it being all that advantageous, especially if you spent any amount of time training around single-side rifles. Now, if you're talking about somebody who's just getting into guns, decided to go the buy once, cry once route, and is looking at a rifle like this, they have no preconceived notions or training. They could get a lot of use out of ambidextrous features and not really break a sweat about it. For anybody who's been training around these types of guns for a long time, I don't think they'll necessarily feel or reap the benefits of these ambidextrous features. Same thing with the charging handle. I don't use the charging handle that much. Most of the time when I'm doing reloads, I'm utilizing the bolt release. The only time I really use the charging handle is either, you know, press checking, showing clear, or clearing a malfunction of some sort, which doesn't happen nearly as often as most people think. So, sure, does a oversized charging handle help with that? Well, yeah, it gives me more surface area to be able to grip and all that type of thing, and I can actuate from either side. I guess that's really neat. But what becomes important to me is that they not be too large and they not necessarily form natural hooks. So I put an ambidextrous charging handle originally on my SPR. It's now sitting on my go-to rifle, which if you're interested in those videos, I'll throw links in the description. And that, I just put an extended latch on that charging handle. That became a giant hook that very naturally grabbed onto like kit and stuff like that. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't wear a lot of gear, doesn't necessarily run your rifles in dynamic ways, maybe you would never notice that to be an issue. I also don't think you would ever notice it to be a benefit, but that's just me. But if you are somebody who runs like kit, who runs vests and stuff like that, and molly gear and all that type of stuff, that charging handle will get caught up on those things. And that's something that you want to pay attention to whenever it is that you're looking at ambidextrous charging handles on rifles. I haven't had that issue with these rifles as of yet. They actually kind of have like melted and rounded corners and stuff like that on them. They're not, I don't assess them to be a high probability of trying to hook onto loops and stuff like that. All right, let's go ahead and talk about upper and lower fitment. So as I try to twist this rifle, I get very little play in the upper and lower. And this is something I don't normally talk about on the channel because I honestly don't care. But this is something that it could be very important to you, especially if you're spending over $2,000 on a rifle. Maybe you're a little bit more invested into whether or not you have a lot of flex between your upper and lower. And I can tell you that there is more movement on this LWRC M6 IC-A5, for sure. So, I could understand somebody being a little bit irritated with that when they're spending $2,800 on a rifle and there's some wiggle. There are things that you can do to fix that. You got like AccuWedges and stuff like that, but I would also be very irritated if that was important to me and I had to add something to my $2,800 rifle in order to diminish receiver wiggle. So you guys can assess that for yourselves. All right, let's talk about triggers. Both of these have like a mil-spec plus trigger in them, which is basically just a mil standard trigger that has had like the surfaces coated in such a manner to make them more capable of like moving past one another with less friction. I have in the past characterized this LWRC's trigger as feeling like somebody added chunks of cold butter to it. So yes, it's a little bit nicer than a mil-spec trigger, but it's not like, it's not some sort of like competition 2-stage or something along those lines. It's not that smooth. I don't consider it to be that much of a benefit. So on the stand of defense, I think the movement is a little bit more defined in the Daniel defense. This might be a slightly better trigger in that I feel like I have a more solid 2-stage, where this rifle feels like it has a little bit more of a rolling 2-stage. The Daniel defense has a very for sure take up, like a very defined wall, where the M6 ICA5 doesn't have as much of one. So I don't consider the triggers in these to be pluses. I would much rather see like a Geisley or something like that before I would say like, oh yeah, that's a super great trigger, something along those lines. Like these do not effectively challenge an actual match trigger. So if that's important to you, you'll be disappointed with either rifle. Pistol grips. This is running a Daniel Defense proprietary grip, which also incorporates the trigger guard here. So I don't really care about like rubberized grips and all that kind of stuff. Grips on AR-15s are probably the thing I'm least interested in, or among the things that I'm least interested in. This does have kind of an A2 bump, which I traditionally do not like, but the curvature of the grip seems to cause the A2 bump to grind less on my hand. I don't know. Time will tell on that. But you could absolutely swap this out if you wanted to. This does have a compartment to be able to put, you know, small tools, spare batteries, which is what I generally throw in these compartments, as well as Skittles, you know, so that you have like your range snack. This IC-A5 has the proprietary LWRC grip, which kind of looks like a Magpul and has been replaced by Magpul grips. We, again, have this kind of rubberized texturing here, which I'm really not that worried about. And, I mean, it's a fairly comfortable grip. I do prefer a little bit more of a vertical grip if I were to have a preference on pistol grips. We also have a compartment here to be able to put batteries. I actually have, I have batteries and stuff like that incorporated into that grip right now. QD points. So we have built-in QD cups at the rear of the receiver here. There are QD cups built into the stock, and then also the rifle came with a QD cup to be able to attach to the rail. The Dynamic Defense has built-in QD cups in the rail, has a built-in QD cup at the rear of the receiver, and then built-in QD cups into the stock as well. So we have plenty of options to be able to mount slings in all the areas that you would want to, without the ability to necessarily be able to run the sling further out towards the muzzle on the Dynamic Defense, whereas with the provided screw-in QD cup on the LWRC, I could run that out as far as I wanted, should I see so fit. So that has a little bit more adaptability built into it. Stocks. These are both proprietary stocks, and these are both different takes on the SOP mod stock. So I have this kind of flared out area here that's supposed to help me build a cheek weld. Now, you'll also note that we have that same kind of rubberization on the stock. Some people with beards have complained that this apparently really pulls at their beard hair. I don't grow a good beard to begin with, and I don't get very many opportunities to grow out a beard, but every time I do, it gets a little bit better, so that's nice. Maybe one day I'll be a real boy. But anyway, so we have this kind of like side saddle cheek piece going on here, and as much as I don't like SOP mod stocks, I do not mind either one of the cheek welds on these rifles. So same thing here with the LWRC. We have kind of a side saddle set up there. I'll go ahead and remove my Wish.com Ranger band here. So you can see there we have that kind of side saddle type setup. No rubberization or anything on it, so if you're worried about your beard hairs, you don't have to. And it is very comfortable to be able to lay my face onto, where I always thought the angle on the SOP mod was too extreme. Now we will also note that this is a very small profile to a stock, almost like a Car 15 stock is what it kind of reminds me of, which, you know, a lot of people talk about like, oh, it'll fit really great with body armor and stuff like that. And we'll talk about that more once we get into the shooting portion. So we can see here, this kind of D shape has more reminiscent of kind of like a normal AR-15 profile stock, though I almost feel like it runs more narrow. I think it doesn't actually, as much as it just, the shape of it just better fits into that pocket of my shoulder. And you can also get spacers and stuff like that to be able to increase the length of pole a little bit if you want to. So both of these stocks I consider to be really good. It's kind of a shooter's preference on what it is that you want out of a stock. I do like that they put this space in here to lighten it, but didn't necessarily turn it into a tail hook stock, because I hate tail hook stocks. That's a giant hook. It's in the name, and that looks like something that would definitely get caught on things, snagged up in confined spaces and stuff like that, and would really drive me nuts. All right, guys, that's the features of these rifles. Why don't we go ahead and talk about how they did out on the range. Now, for range shooting, I started off with how I normally do range assessments or accuracy assessments here on the channel. So I started off with 55 grain ammunition because that's what I primarily shoot. It's inexpensive, it's available, and I shoot every weekend. I also compete and stuff like that. Ammunition costs are high for me, so I buy a lot of really cheap ammo. An important thing to remember, especially if you're new to the channel, an important thing to know at that point, is on the channel I review rifles based on how I have them equipped and how I expect that I will be using them. I do not have a high-powered optic that I rotate between the rifles and stuff like that whenever it is that I'm doing reviews, and I do not go out and I don't run out and buy super fancy match grade ammunition to run through them, because that would be detrimental to other costs associated with the channel. I don't get paid to do this. This is all out of my pocket. So we kind of get what we get. So I, in this case, started off this evaluation with 55 grain Barnaul and FMJ boat tail loading. Of course, accuracy testing done at 100 yards. Here's the shooting footage. All right, how did our rifles do in that assessment? Well, starting off with the Daniel Defense, not well. We got this 8 15/16 group. It's the entire page, almost a 9-inch group. Now, the LWRC has a red dot on it, and the Daniel Defense has a 1:6 LPVO on it. So I shot this on 1 power in order to be able to make sure that we're doing as much of a accurate comparison between this optic and that one. So both of these are being tested at 1x. We got this 8 15/16 inch group with 55 grain steel case Barnaul. Not impressive, quite abysmal actually. That goes up against this same load, 55 grain FMJ boat tail from Barnaul, 100-yard group out of the LWRC at 3 3/8 inch, just under 3.5 inches. That's a pretty significant difference there. That is under half the size of a group between those two rifles. Both of these are 1-in-7 twist. Both of these are chrome lined barrels. They're very high quality barrels, and it's not unexpected that they wouldn't like 55 grain ammunition with that 1-in-7 twist. And though nobody would necessarily write home about this LWRC's group, this is pretty consistent with what I've gotten out of it in the past with 55 grain ammo. However, to do the rifles more justice, I do have some heavier grain ammunition lying around, specifically some American Eagle 75 grain TMJs. So, let's go ahead and check out the shooting footage from this. Ah, yes, very thrilling, shooting from a bench. Anyway, with the Daniel Defense, again, shooting at 1 power off of my 1:6 LPVO, at 100 yards with the 75 grain TMJs from American Eagle, I got this 5 1/4 inch group. Okay, our group got a little bit smaller, not a lot of bit smaller, but I mean, just over half smaller than what we got out of the 55 grain ammunition, but still not necessarily a stellar group. How does that compare against the M6 IC-A5 shooting the same load? Well, with that, I got a 4 1/8 inch group. Now, we note that we have a flyer up here. Had that not occurred, I think we would have something more similar to the first group that we got with the 55 grain ammunition. So it seems overall the LWRC is winning the accuracy game. Yeah, this would be much closer to about 3.5 inches that we had in the 55 grain group had I not had that flyer occur. And that was probably me, but we got to take the results that we have. So 4 1/8 inch group. Overall, the LWRC right now is winning in accuracy. Okay, but shooting from a bench and evaluating accuracy and all that kind of stuff is just one portion of the equation. In my opinion, these are fighting rifles. And in the more current vernacular, these would be referred to as general purpose rifles. But I prefer to refer to them as fighting rifles. These are what I would be grabbing up if I had to go, I don't know, fight Russians falling from the sky or something along those lines. So for that, why don't we go ahead and get into some shooting drills, starting off with an El Guapo drill. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the El Guapo drill, it is an update of the El Prez. The El Prez involves 3 targets, 2 rounds each with a reload, and was originally built around revolvers. The El Guapo drill is supposed to be more geared towards semi-autos with a higher capacity. So this is 6 targets, 2 rounds each, reload 2 rounds each for overall 24 rounds fired. Now, I didn't have 6 targets to lay out there. I don't have a whole bunch of target backers. So instead, I used 1.5-inch target pasters in order to get 6 individual targets on 1 backer. So I'm not necessarily having as drastic of movements in between my targets, but I am still having to move. So with that, why don't we go ahead and check out these shots on the timer. All right, guys, so I ran both rifles, and I didn't necessarily get a lot of opportunity to warm up or anything along those lines. I kind of just ran them dry, ran them cold, so to speak, which honestly, if you're in some type of fight or something along those lines, you're going to be starting from cold as it is. So with that being the case, I managed to do that drill with reload with the M6 IC-A5 in 18.63 versus the Daniel Defense's 17.8. So a 0.83 difference benefiting the Daniel Defense. What were some things that I noticed in the process of shooting? I definitely noticed that the IC-A5 had more recoil. There was more disturbance, more jump to my dot whenever it is that I pulled the trigger, whereas the Daniel Defense felt very smooth. I felt like it was very easy for me to be able to get back on target and all that kind of stuff. Now, I do think I was just starting to find my pace with the LWRC as I was finishing the drill. So maybe if I had done a second run or something like that, I could have gotten better results, but we take the results that we have. We have to work off of the information that we have available. Now, when it came to mounting these rifles, as you guys can see, I was wearing body armor and stuff like that in order to evaluate if I felt like one rifle had a better time getting into the pocket than the other. And I got to tell you guys, I really didn't notice a difference. Now, a lot of that also has to do with the fact that my plate carrier is cut in such a way that I have fairly easy access to my shoulder pocket as it is. If you're talking to somebody who's used to wearing IOTVs or IBAs, they remember the days of having to like really fight with their vest in order to be able to get a good stock placement so that they could like zero or something like that, or be able to go through like qualifications and all that type of stuff. On plate carriers, you can, and especially if you get to choose your own equipment, which if you're somebody in the military, you don't, or perhaps in law enforcement, you don't necessarily get to do that. But when you're a civilian, you can choose whatever equipment it is that you want, and you can choose to make sure that you have ample space to be able to place your stock. Same thing with like body armor and stuff like that. You can get plates, excuse me, same thing with plates. You can get plates that are cut in such a manner that they will help give you more space to be able to put your stock. So long story short, I didn't have an issue with either rifle stock placement. Maybe another run through would have given me a faster result with the LWRC, but we've got what we've got. So from there, I then went into a failure to stop drill, which is the politically correct version of the Mozambique, or is the politically correct term for the Mozambique, which is 2 shots to the head, or 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head. So with that, why don't we go ahead and check out that footage. All right, the LWRC did the failure to stop drill in 3.04, which is surprisingly slow. The Daniel Defense did it in 1.92, which is more of what I would have expected. Now, one thing with this rifle, I'm not making excuses. We're taking the results as they are. This rifle did it just over half the time as compared to this rifle. The Daniel Defense is the clear winner over the IC-A5 when it comes to the Mozambique, and just barely edges out the IC-A5 when it comes to the El Guapo drill. However, I had a lot of confusing stuff on the board, and I told myself I was going to go from center dot to top dot for the Mozambique, and as I was coming up from my low ready, I started to stop at the bottom dot and then had to get myself back under control and drive up to that second dot to then go after the top dot. So that's a starter step on my part. Again, had I spent some time practicing, or maybe did a few runs before actual filming and posting, perhaps we'd have a different result, but we got to go with what we got. And the LWRC was very clearly beaten out in that drill with the Daniel Defense, whereas with the Daniel Defense, I pretty easily and quickly moved in between those targets. I can tell you that I don't feel like the triggers did a whole lot for my speed and all that kind of stuff. If anything, they kind of held me back. Where a lighter trigger, it would have been faster to be able to get those follow-ups and stuff like that. All right, guys. That's our shooting portion. Let's go ahead and start getting into my conclusions, not conclusions. I honestly believe, this is kind of the bottom line up front, that you can not go wrong with either one of these rifles. If you decide that you want the steadfast reliability of the external gas piston, and you'll just have to work around the recoil impulse and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to run this rifle effectively, then that's just fine. I understand that completely. I think the Nicor bolt is also a really great feature of this rifle. But if you like the little bit lower price point and smoother recoil profile of the Daniel Defense, I wouldn't fault you for going this direction either. I do not think there is a wrong choice. The only thing that you have to decide for yourself is which one, what data pointed towards being the better bang for your buck. Now, as a little caveat for the LWRC, I did have one more round left, so I decided to go ahead and see what I could do from low ready as far as like first round. And I managed to go from low ready to fire in 1.09. Again, a little slower than what I would like to see, but at a 1.09 for the first shot, I think we would have had a very comparable time for 3 shots on the Mozambique to the Daniel Defense RIS M4A1. So something to keep in mind there. I'm not trying to make excuses for this rifle. I'm honestly not. I'm trying to make sure that I give you guys all of the data that I have available. All right, guys. Going along with that, perhaps if I had changed up which rifle it is that I started each drill with, maybe that would have caused the Daniel Defense to have a little bit of a hesitation as I got dot confused as I was registering my target and all that kind of stuff. Is that a big deal? I guess I kind of leave it up to you guys. Why don't you guys let me know in the comments section, do you think that I gave both of these rifles a fair shake, and should I redo the comparison with some input from y'all? I'm curious to hear about it. All right, and with that, that's pretty much what I got, guys. Have a good day.